Hello, my friend. Tonight we stand in the cold breath of Salisbury Plain, long before the stones have become a ruin, long before kings, monks, travellers, soldiers, and scholars come to stare at them in wonder. The sky is pale, the grass is wet. A mist hangs low across the open land, and in that mist figures are moving. They do not speak loudly. They work with antler picks, wooden shovels, woven baskets, and hands hardened by years of soil, fire, and stone. Each strike into the chalk breaks the silence with a dull, careful sound. The ground is white beneath them, as if the earth has a hidden bone. Piece by piece, they loosen it, lift it, carry it, and cast it aside. Around them, the first shape appears. A circle. Not a perfect circle in the modern mind, drawn by ink or machine, but a sacred line cut into the living earth. The ditch begins to open, the bank begins to rise. The plain, once continuous and unbroken, is being wounded with intention. Something is being separated from the ordinary world. Something is being made difficult to cross, and yet no one here can read a written order. No king has left his name. No architect has signed a plan. No priest has carved a command into a tablet for the future to understand. The people in the dawn know what they're doing, but they leave us almost no words. Only the cut earth remains. Across the grass, smoke drifts from distant fires. Dogs move near the edge of the gathering. Children watch from behind older bodies, quiet because the adults are quiet. Somewhere, cattle shift in their pens, snorting softly into the morning air. The smell is of damp wool, cold ash, trampled herbs, and fresh chalk newly torn from the ground. A man kneels at the edge of the ditch. His hands are white with dust. He pauses, looks toward the horizon, and listens. Perhaps he hears only the wind. Perhaps he hears the voice of a dead ancestor. Perhaps, in that moment, the difference between the two is not as clear as we would like to believe. The work resumes. There is no wheel turning beside them. There is no iron blade. There is no written mathematics as we know it. Yet the line continues. The ditch curves with purpose. The people understand distance, rhythm, direction, and ceremony through memory, practice, and watching the sky. They measure with bodies, chords, stakes, footsteps, and repeated acts of attention. The scene is calm, but it is not simple. For every basket of chalk lifted from the ground, someone has agreed to be here instead of tending a field, mending a fence, shaping a tool, or guarding animals. For every antler pick worn blunt, there is a red deer that once moved through woodland and valley. For every meal shared by the workers, grain has been harvested, cattle have been driven, fires have been lit, and families have been organized around a purpose larger than hunger. This is not casual labor. It is a gathering. The plain is becoming a stage for something that cannot yet be seen. The first earthwork is only the beginning of the mystery, but even this beginning is already immense. To cut a ditch in chalk is to make a promise to the land. To raise a bank is to declare that memory has a boundary. To shape a circle is to suggest that time itself may return. Above them, the morning light strengthens. The mist thins. The wide sky opens, enormous and pale, stretching over a landscape of low ridges and empty distance. This is a world without stone towers, without cities, without roads paved by empire. But it is not a world without knowledge. It is not a world without imagination. It is not a world without power. On the edge of the work, a group of elders stands apart. Their faces are lined, their cloaks pulled close against the cold. They watch not only the workers, but the shape of the horizon. The places where the sun rises and sets matter here. The slow turn of seasons matters. The dead matter. The living matter because they carry the dead inside their stories. One day, stones will stand here. Huge stones! Some will come from nearby, though nearby still means labour beyond ordinary life. Others will come from a distant western land of hills, springs, and hard blue rock. They will travel farther than seems reasonable. They will be dragged, hauled, lifted, broken, shaped, and placed with care that still unsettles the modern mind. But in this cold beginning, there are no towering arches yet. There is only the idea taking hold. That may be the most astonishing part. Before the stones there is belief. Before the monument there is agreement. Before the famous silhouette rises against the sunset, people must first imagine that the plain can be transformed. They must decide that a particular place is not like other places. They must return to it, again and again, until habit becomes ceremony, ceremony becomes identity, and identity becomes stone. A young worker climbs from the ditch with chalk dust on his knees. He breathes hard. His palms are raw. He looks across the growing bank and sees the curve stretching away into mist. He cannot know that thousands of years will pass and people will still ask why. He cannot know that his labour will survive the language he speaks, the names of his kin, and the songs sung over the evening fires. He only knows that he has been called here. There is power in that. Not the power of armies marching beneath banners, not the power of written law sealed by a palace. This is older, quieter, and in some ways more haunting. It is the power to gather human bodies around an invisible meaning. It is the power to make people carry weight because the weight itself has become sacred. The sun lifts higher. Shadows shorten. The first cut in the earth grows deeper. Men and women move in lines, passing baskets, clearing chalk, murmuring instructions. The rhythm becomes almost like breathing. Strike, lift, carry, pour, return, strike again, and beneath the ordinary rhythm of work, another rhythm waits. The rhythm of the year, light and darkness, birth and burial, distance and return. The people on the plain are not building for convenience. They are not building shelter from rain. They are not building a fortress against a known enemy. What they are making belongs to another category of human effort, the kind that rises when survival alone is no longer enough, when a community begins to ask what holds the world together. In the silence before dawn, the answer is not spoken. It is dug. It is measured. It is carried in baskets of chalk. And as the first pale bank rises under the widening sky, Salisbury Plain is no longer just a stretch of grass and wind. It has become a threshold. The living step around it with care. The dead seem close. The horizon watches. Somewhere beyond the mist, more people are coming. They come over ridges, along tracks. From scattered farms and wooded valleys, they bring food, tools, stories, and questions they may not put into words. They come because something has begun here, something too large for one household, too strange for one season, and too powerful to remain hidden in the soil. The plain holds its breath, the circle opens, and the world begins to change. The plain seems empty at first. It rolls beneath a wide southern sky, with grass bending in the wind and larks lifting into pale light. From a distance, Salisbury Plain appears open and bare, a place of quiet ridges, shallow valleys, and chalk underfoot. Yet this apparent emptiness is misleading. The land is full of pathways. It is crossed by memory, hunger, trade, ritual, and the slow footsteps of people who know every hollow in the ground. To understand the scale of this world, we must not imagine one lonely monument standing in isolation. We must imagine a landscape alive with movement. Far beyond the open grass, rivers thread through the chalk country. The Avon runs through valleys where reeds lean over dark water and fish flicker beneath the surface. Smaller streams slip through meadows and wooded edges, guiding travellers who follow water because water remembers the easiest way through the land. In a world without signposts, rivers are roads that shine. The people who move through this country read the earth as carefully as a text. A ridge can lead the eye, a spring can mark a stopping place, a stand of trees can shelter a night fire, a distant hill can hold a story. The whole land is a map, but not a map drawn flat. It is a map walked by the feet, carried in the mind, and passed on through repeated journeys. And the journeys are longer than they seem. A person standing on the chalklands of Wiltshire may belong to a village nearby, but the objects in that village can speak of distant places. Stone axes polished to a green sheen may have come from quarries far to the north or west. Shells, amber, and fine flint may have passed from hand to hand across territories, valleys, and coasts. A necklace bead may carry more distance than the person wearing it has ever travelled. This is a world connected by exchange, but not by money as we understand it. Gifts move, marriage partners move, cattle move, stories move faster than bodies, carried from fire to fire in winter, from feast to feast in summer. A strange object arriving from far away is never merely an object. It is proof that the world extends beyond the next ridge. The land widens. To the south lies the sea, restless and grey, opening toward coasts that could be crossed by boat in calm weather and feared in storm. To the west, the land grows rougher, rising toward uplands, moors, and ancient stone country. Beyond river valleys and wooded slopes are the Preseli Hills, where blue-grey stones lie in outcrops shaped by time, weather, and deep geology. Their distance is not only measured in miles, it is measured in effort, danger, and meaning. Between those hills and the chalklands stretches a world of obstacles. There are rivers to cross, forests to enter, marshy ground to avoid, and uplands where fog can erase direction. There are animals, hunger, broken tools, sudden illness, and disagreements among travellers. There are communities whose welcome cannot be assumed. A journey across such a world requires knowledge, negotiation, planning, and trust. It also requires a reason strong enough to survive exhaustion. That reason is hidden from us, but the distance remains. Across southern Britain, the Neolithic world is neither primitive nor simple. It is a mosaic of territories, kin groups, farms, pastures, sacred places, burial grounds, and gathering sites. Some communities live near rivers, others occupy higher ground, some clear woodland for fields, while others move cattle through seasonal routes. The land is not empty wilderness. It is used, named, remembered, and argued over. At certain times of year, paths grow busier, people leave settlements and move toward places where many tracks converge. They bring cattle with broad foreheads and curved horns. They carry grain in baskets, skins of water or drink, tools wrapped in hide, and personal ornaments worn carefully on the body. Children walk beside adults. Dogs range at the edges. Smoke from temporary camps rises into the air as groups arrive from different directions. These gatherings must have changed the feeling of the landscape. A quiet valley becomes loud with voices. A track becomes packed with footprints. Fires burn through the dusk. News is exchanged. Marriages are arranged. Disputes are settled or sharpened. People who may live apart for most of the year stand close together beneath the same sky, measuring one another, remembering obligations, and renewing bonds. In such moments, geography becomes social. The distance between two settlements is not only physical, it is the distance between families, alliances, rivalries, and shared ancestors. A river crossing may be remembered because a marriage party once passed there. A hilltop may matter because a respected elder was buried nearby. A grove may be avoided because of a story no one tells after dark. Land is never just land when people have lived inside it for generations. The chalk itself shapes the imagination. Under the thin soil lies white stone, soft enough to cut, bright enough to shine when freshly exposed. When people dig into it, the earth seems to reveal a hidden light. Banks made from chalk can gleam in the sun, visible across distance like pale scars or deliberate signals. This quality matters. In a landscape of green and brown, the white of opened chalk is startling. It looks like a sign. The sky matters too. Salisbury Plain sits beneath a broad horizon. There are no high mountains to close the view. Light travels across the land in long sweeps. The rising sun, the setting sun, the moon, and the slow-turning stars can be watched with care. In such a place, the heavens do not feel remote. They appear to move along the edge of the world, touching the ground in predictable places. For communities that live by seasons, this is not abstract knowledge. The sun tells of warmth returning. The lengthening day promises growth. The darkening half of the year brings slaughter, storage, cold, and remembrance. To watch the sky is to watch survival. To mark a turning point in light is to mark a turning point in life. The horizon becomes a calendar written without ink. But the plain is not the only sacred landscape. Around it, other monuments rise or wait in earth and timber. Long barrows hold the bones of the dead in chambers of stone and chalk. Causewayed enclosures lie behind interrupted ditches, places where people gathered, deposited objects, feasted, and perhaps settled conflicts. Timber circles and avenues create lines of movement, guiding bodies through space. Each site has its own presence, its own rules, its own remembered stories. The world is crowded with meaning. A traveller crossing this region might not see a city, but would pass through zones of belonging. A burial mound on a ridge, a cleared field near a settlement, a track worn by cattle hooves, a ring of posts dark against the sky, a place where fires had burned many times. The signs would not be written, but they would be understood by those raised among them. And yet, even within this dense human world, Salisbury Plain holds a particular power. Its openness allows distance to gather in the eye. Its chalk allows marks to endure. Its rivers connect it to wider movement. Its horizons invite the watching of sun and moon. It lies near enough to communities to be reached, yet open enough to feel set apart. It is ordinary land made extraordinary by position, memory, and repeated attention. For those who came from far places, arriving here may have felt like entering a vast bowl of sky. The wind would touch them first, then the smell of grass, smoke, animals, and damp earth. Then the sight of people already gathered in the distance. They would see not a city, not a palace, not a market of stone streets, but a ceremonial landscape large enough to hold many communities without belonging entirely to any one of them. That is the scale of the world, not empire, not wilderness, a living network of paths, rivers, kinship, exchange, and belief, spread across chalklands and western hills, across farms and forests, across the visible and the remembered. In that world, distance did not prevent connection. It made connection meaningful. And somewhere in that wide web of movement, people began to bring their attention to one open place beneath the sky. Who were they? The question rests over the plain like evening mist. It seems simple at first, almost gentle. We want names. We want a people with a clear border, a ruler, a language preserved in signs, a story that begins in one place and moves toward another. We want the builders to step forward from the grass and introduce themselves, but they do not. They left no written chronicle, no carved list of kings, no inscription saying, "This is why we laboured. This is whom we honoured. This is what we feared." Their voices are not absent because they had nothing to say. They are absent because their world spoke in other materials: earth, bone, timber, stone, fire, alignment, repetition, burial. This makes the mystery deeper, not smaller. They were people of the Neolithic, a word that means the newer age of stone. But that phrase can mislead the imagination. It can make them seem trapped in simplicity, as if their tools were the measure of their minds. They had no metal, but they had memory. They had no alphabet, but they had tradition. They had no cities, but they could organize labor across large landscapes and keep sacred designs alive across generations. Where did they come from? Some of their deep ancestry reached back to farming communities that had spread slowly across Europe, carrying wheat, barley, cattle, sheep, pottery, polished stone axes, and new ideas about land. In Britain, farming did not arrive as a single moment. It came through contact, movement, intermarriage, settlement, and adaptation. The people who built monuments were heirs to those changes, living in a land already transformed by centuries of clearing, grazing, planting, burial, and ritual gathering, yet they were also shaped by older presences. Before farming, hunter-gatherers had lived across Britain for millennia, following animals, rivers, coastlines, and seasonal abundance. Their knowledge of wild places did not simply vanish when fields appeared. Memories of older landscapes may have survived in practice, story, and movement. The world of the builders was not a clean beginning. It was a layering of ways of life, one placed upon another, like soil slowly forming over chalk. How did they rise? Not through conquest in the familiar sense. Not through banners, siege walls, and royal armies. Their rise was quieter. It came through the power to gather. Families who lived apart most of the year could be drawn together by ceremony, obligation, feasting, marriage, shared ancestry, and the need to renew trust. A monument did not require a state, but it required coordination. It required people to believe that the task mattered. That belief is difficult to measure. A bone can be dated, a ditch can be surveyed, a stone can be traced to a geological source. But conviction leaves fewer marks. We see its outline only in what people were willing to do. They dug large earthworks without iron. They transported heavy stones without engines. They returned to meaningful places again and again, sometimes across centuries. Their actions say that the invisible world was not a private thought. It was a public force. Why did their world change? This question is not only about collapse, it is also about transformation. Their world changed because all human worlds change. Populations shifted, customs evolved, new materials arrived, long-distance contacts widened, burial traditions moved from shared ancestral tombs toward more individual graves. Metalworking would eventually alter prestige, exchange, warfare, and display. The old sacred landscape did not disappear in one sudden breath, but its meanings loosened. A place can remain standing while its purpose fades. That is one of history's quieter tragedies. People continue to walk past old forms, but no longer know the exact words once spoken there. Children play near a mound whose dead are no longer named. Travellers see stones on the horizon, yet the original stories have become fragments. The monument endures, but the mind that made it withdraws, step by step, into darkness. What did they leave behind? They left a question so large that it became part of the monument itself. They left circles, banks, pits, avenues, cremated bones, broken tools, animal remains, pottery fragments, and marks in the earth that can still be read with care. They left a landscape where ritual was not confined to a single structure, but spread across ridges, rivers, paths, graves, and gathering places. Most of all, they left evidence of intention. This matters. Stonehenge is not mysterious because ancient people could not have built it. They could. The mystery is why they chose to build it in precisely this way, in this place, with such persistence. The true question is not whether they were capable. The true question is what kind of world made such labour necessary. Imagine a family approaching the plain at dusk. They have walked for hours. Their feet ache. A child sleeps against a mother's shoulder. An older man carries a polished axe wrapped carefully in hide, not because it is useful for chopping wood that night, but because it holds value beyond a use. A young woman leads cattle on a rope. Smoke rises in the distance. Voices drift through the cool air. Somewhere ahead, a place of gathering waits. For that family, the monument is not an archaeological problem. It is part of life. It may be a place of the dead, a place of healing, a place of seasonal turning, a place of alliance, a place where different communities become one for a short time. It may be several of these things at once. Ancient sacred places rarely obey a single explanation. This is where the modern mind must slow down. We often ask for one answer. Was it a temple? Was it a calendar? Was it a burial place? Was it a symbol of unity? Was it a sign of power? The quieter possibility is that it was not one thing. It could hold many meanings, layered through time. A place begun for the dead might become a place of the sun. A gathering site might become a monument of identity. A stone circle might carry older memories from timber, earth, and bone. Human meaning is rarely fixed. A house becomes an ancestral home. A road becomes a pilgrimage route. A grave becomes a shrine. A hill becomes the place where a people remembers itself. The builders of Stonehenge lived in a world where such transformations were possible, perhaps even expected. What mattered was not only the material form, but the repeated act of returning. And there is another question, more intimate than all the rest. What did it feel like to belong to this world? To wake before dawn in a roundhouse smelling of smoke and stored grain, to hear cattle shifting outside, to know the names of nearby streams and the stories of distant stones, to fear sickness, hunger, and winter, to honour the dead not as distant memories, but as presences close to the living, to look at the sun's movement and feel that the order of the sky and the order of the community were bound together. These people were not symbols. They were not shadows placed beneath a monument. They were bodies in weather. They were hands, voices, griefs, ambitions, rivalries, and hopes. Some were skilled, some were old, some were frightened, some doubted. Some remembered the first time they were brought to the sacred place as children, and years later brought children of their own. The deepest mystery is not that they built with stone, it is that they built with time. A monument like this is not made in a single human mood. It requires memory to pass from one season to another, from one generation to another, from one group of hands to hands not yet born when the first decisions were made. It requires a community to keep answering a call that no one has written down. So the questions remain: who are they? People of fields, cattle, ancestors, rivers, and sky. Where did they come from deep movements of population and older landscapes of memory? How did they rise through gathering, belief, labour, and shared ceremony? Why did their world change because new customs, pressures, materials, and meanings entered the land? What did they leave behind? Not an explanation, but a presence. And that presence still stands, asking softly across the centuries why human beings will sometimes move the earth itself to make meaning endure. To understand the people of Salisbury Plain, we must go deeper than stone. We must go down into climate, soil, water, woodland, and the slow patience of the land itself. Long before any great monument commanded the horizon, southern Britain was a place shaped by ice that had withdrawn, seas that had risen, forests that had thickened, and animals that had followed the changing seasons through valley and ridge. The human story did not begin with building. It began with listening to the land. The chalk beneath Wiltshire is ancient seabed, made from countless tiny lives compressed over unimaginable time. It lies pale under the grass, soft enough to cut, porous enough to hold and release water in hidden ways. Rain sinks through it, springs emerge where layers meet, valleys curve gently through it. The land seems open, but its openness is the result of deep geological memory. For people living here thousands of years ago, chalk was not an abstract material. It shaped where water could be found, where fields could be cleared, where animals could graze, and where a bright bank or mound could be made visible from afar. The ground guided action. It offered possibilities. It invited marks. Across much of Britain, the warmer centuries after the last ice age allowed forests to spread. Oak, elm, hazel, ash, and lime formed green canopies over broad areas of land. Under them grew ferns, moss, fungi, and low thickets where wild animals moved almost silently. Deer browsed in clearings. Wild boar rooted in damp soil. Birds called in layered voices from branches above. This was not a tame country. A person walking through deep woodland would hear more than see. Twigs cracking beyond sight, wings lifting suddenly, wind rubbing leaves together in a long whisper. Paths existed where animals made them, where people returned often enough to keep them open, or where rivers offered easier passage. The world could feel close and enclosed beneath the trees, with sky appearing only in fragments. Then farming altered the rhythm. Woodland began to give way in places to clearings, fields, pasture, and settlement. This did not happen everywhere at once. It was gradual, uneven, and often difficult. Trees had to be felled, ring-barked, burned, or left to die standing. Roots had to be worked around. Soil had to be watched and understood. A field was not simply taken from the forest. It was negotiated from it, season by season. The first farmers in Britain brought more than seeds and animals. They brought a different relationship with time. Grain requires planning, cattle require care through winter. Fields create attachment to particular places. Harvests make success and failure visible. Storage produces anxiety, because stored food can be lost, stolen, spoiled, or consumed too quickly. Farming gives stability, but it also gives new fears. The land asked for patience. A seed hidden in soil demands trust. A calf born in spring must survive long enough to matter. A clearing must be maintained or woodland will reclaim it. Every year becomes a cycle of hope and threat. Rain may come too late. Cold may linger. Disease may pass through animals. A family may work for months and still face hunger. In such a world, the sky is never only beautiful. It is watched for signs. A bright winter dawn can feel like a promise. A long wet season can bring worry into every house. The returning sun is not an idea from poetry. It is warmth entering the bones of people and animals. It is grass growing again. It is the possibility that life will continue. The rivers, too, held power. The Avon and its neighbouring waters moved through the chalk country like living lines. They offered fish, reeds, damp meadows, drinking places, and routes through a world that could otherwise resist movement. Rivers also carried sound and reflection. A person standing near water at twilight might see the sky below as well as above. The world doubled in darkening light. Places where water emerged from the earth may have seemed especially charged. Springs rise quietly, but they appear to come from hidden depths. In many ancient societies, such places become thresholds, neither fully of the underworld nor the visible surface. Even without knowing the exact beliefs of these communities, it is easy to understand why water, chalk, and sky could combine into a powerful sacred language. The climate was not fixed. Generations experienced shifts in warmth, moisture, tree cover, and agricultural possibility. Small changes could matter greatly. A slightly wetter period could alter pasture. A colder stretch could shorten growing seasons. A community that remembered abundance might later face difficulty and wonder what had changed in the balance between people, ancestors, animals, and the forces above. Landscape shaped imagination because landscape shaped survival. The open downs did not merely provide a convenient setting. They trained the eye toward horizons. They exposed the body to wind. They made the movement of light visible across great distances. A person who lived in a forest might feel surrounded by trees and spirits close at hand. A person gathering on open chalkland might feel watched by the whole sky. Migration added another layer. People did not arrive in Britain as a single wave and then remain unchanged. Families moved, groups mixed, ideas passed along coastlines and river valleys. The sea was a barrier at times, but also a road for those who knew boats, tides, and weather. Across generations, cattle, crops, pottery styles, stone tools, and ritual habits moved through networks wider than any one village could see. Every arrival required adaptation. Knowledge suited to one valley might not fit another. A crop that grew well in one soil might struggle elsewhere. Animals had to be managed according to local pasture. Newcomers had to learn where water lay, where frost settled, where woodland was dense, where the land was generous, and where it punished carelessness. The environment did not simply receive people, it taught them. In the far west, the Preseli Hills rose with a different mood from the chalklands. There, stone outcrops stood in harder country, weathered and blue-grey, touched by mist and rain. Streams cut through slopes. The air could feel colder, the ground rougher, the distances more folded and secret. A stone from such a place would carry more than weight. It would carry landscape. This matters because ancient people often understood materials through origin. A stone was not only a stone. It could belong to a hill, a spring, a story, a colour, a memory of a journey, wood from a certain grove, bone from a certain animal, chalk from a certain cut in the ground. All could hold associations that modern categories fail to catch. Material and meaning were not separate. They were braided together. The deep origins of Stonehenge's world lie in this braid. Chalk and water, forest and clearing, farming and older wandering, local belonging and distant connection, seasonal danger and celestial order. Out of these forces came communities who knew that human life depended on more than labour. It depended on right relationship with land, animals, dead kin, neighbouring groups, and the powers that moved through weather and light. The monument was not imposed on an empty place. It grew from a world already full of signs. The land had been speaking for a very long time. People learned its grammar slowly, through hunger, burial, walking, planting, watching, and return. They saw where mist gathered in hollows. They saw where the sun touched the horizon in winter. They saw chalk shine beneath dark soil. They saw water rise from hidden places. And from these repeated encounters, they formed a way of understanding the world that could turn Earth itself into memory. For a while the world seemed still, but beneath that stillness, roots were gripping soil. Rivers were cutting valleys. Forests were yielding to fields, and human minds were learning to measure the invisible through the visible. The first foundation was not a stone set upright. It was a landscape made meaningful by countless acts of attention. Far from the great outlines drawn on the land, life begins in smaller circles. A hearth glows in the centre of a house. Smoke rises slowly toward the roof, finding its way through thatch, timber, and the darkened gaps above. Around the fire, people sleep, speak, mend, grind, scrape, and listen. Outside, the wind moves across fields and pasture. Inside, warmth gathers around embers, and the world becomes human-sized. These homes are not palaces. They are not poor places either. They are working places, smelling of ash, hides, grain, damp wool, stored food, and bodies resting after labour. Walls may be made from posts, woven branches, daub, turf, or other local materials, depending on place and need. A person entering such a house would notice tools set within reach, baskets tucked aside, skins drying, pots near the fire, and shadows moving softly across the curved interior. Here, history is not dramatic. It is repeated. Hands turn grain into meal on a saddle quern. The movement is steady, forward and back, stone against stone, shoulder and wrist remembering the task without needing thought. Flour gathers slowly. It may become a rough bread, a porridge, or part of a meal shared among kin. The sound of grinding is one of the hidden sounds of the Neolithic world, ordinary enough to disappear from memory, essential enough to shape every day. Outside, cattle matter deeply. They are not merely food. They are wealth, movement, obligation, and status. A herd requires pasture, water, care, and defence. The breath of cattle in cold air, the weight of their bodies, the danger of their horns, the warmth of dung and hide all belong to daily life. To own cattle is to manage both possibility and anxiety. An animal may feed people, mark alliance, settle debt, or become the centre of a feast. Fields hold another kind of patience. Barley and wheat must be watched through their fragile beginnings. Weeds are pulled, birds are driven away, weather is studied with a seriousness born from necessity. The people know that food comes from labour, but also from forces beyond command. A field can disappoint, a harvest can fail. A full storage pit can become an empty one too soon. The small fears of the household never fully sleep. A child coughs in the night, a pot cracks near the fire, a dog barks toward darkness, a woman checks stored grain for damp, a man studies the edge of a flint blade and wonders whether it will hold through another day's work. These are not grand mysteries, yet they are the ground on which all larger mysteries stand. No monument can rise unless homes survive. Tools carry intimacy. A flint scraper fits the hand because it has been used often. A polished axe shines from hours of grinding and care. Bone pins, antler picks, awls, blades, baskets, wooden bowls, and cordage all belong to a world in which making is constant. People do not live surrounded by disposable things. Objects take time. They hold effort. When they break, the loss is felt. Some tools may travel through families. An axe may be valued not only because it cuts, but because it came from a distant quarry, or because an elder once used it, or because it was exchanged during an important gathering. A bead may be small, but it can carry a marriage, a journey, a promise, or a memory of a dead hand. Material life is never silent. It whispers biography. Food also tells of connection. Meat from cattle, pigs, or wild animals may be cooked over fire or in pits. Milk may be used in ways that are difficult to see clearly from the distance of time, yet animals kept alive for more than meat suggest many possibilities. Hazelnuts, berries, gathered plants, fish, and wild resources may supplement cultivated food. The boundary between farming and foraging is not a wall. It is a shifting edge. A feast changes everything. For most days, food is careful, measured, and familiar. But when people gather in number, slaughter and cooking become acts of public meaning. Cattle are killed, bones are cracked, smoke thickens, fat drips into flame. People eat together, and eating together creates a memory stronger than speech alone. A feast can renew peace. It can display wealth. It can mark a death, a marriage, a season, or a decision no one wants forgotten. At such gatherings, identity becomes visible. People notice who sits near whom, who receives the best portion, who gives, who accepts, who stands apart. Clothing, ornaments, scars, hair, and gestures all speak quietly. A person's place in the social world can be read in small details, and those details may matter as much as any formal law. Children learn by watching. They learn where to walk, when to speak, how to hold a tool, how to approach an animal, how to listen when elders tell stories near the fire. They learn the names of kin, both living and dead. They learn which places are safe, which places are sacred, which places are avoided. Much of their education is never announced as teaching. It is absorbed through repetition. Death is close, not hidden away behind distant walls, not softened by written records or polished memorials, but present in bone, ash, burial, memory, and ritual. Some dead are placed in tombs where their remains may be revisited, rearranged, remembered, and joined with others. A body can become part of an ancestral community. A skull, a long bone, a handful of cremated remains may carry presence beyond the moment of grief. This closeness to the dead may feel strange from a modern distance. Yet for these communities, ancestors could be part of the living order. The dead may have guarded land, legitimized belonging, or linked scattered families through shared descent. A burial place was not simply where someone ended. It could be where a community began again, each visit renewing ties between memory and place. Ritual did not belong only to great ceremonies. It could appear in the placing of an object in a ditch, the burning of a body, the careful treatment of animal bones, the selection of a stone, the movement of people along a path at a particular time. Ordinary acts and sacred acts may have overlapped in ways we cannot neatly separate. A meal might be practical and ceremonial. A tool might be useful and powerful. A house might shelter the living while holding traces of the dead. The senses were constantly engaged. Wet earth under bare or wrapped feet, smoke stinging the eyes, the rough pull of wool or hide against skin, the sweet smell of crushed grass, the iron dark taste of blood from slaughtered animals, the warmth of another body in a crowded house, the white glare of chalk in sunlight, the cold silence of stars above an open field. From these sensations, a world was built, not only with stones, but with habits, with mornings of work, evenings of story, seasons of hunger, days of abundance, births, injuries, marriages, disputes, repairs, and burials. The people who gathered on Salisbury Plain were not only monument makers, they were farmers, herders, parents, mourners, healers, craft workers, traders, singers, rivals, and children grown old. Their lives were intimate before they were monumental, and perhaps this is the quiet revelation hidden beneath the grandeur of Stonehenge. The great stones did not rise from an abstract civilization. They rose from houses where grain was ground in smoke, from fields watched anxiously under changing skies, from cattle driven through mud, from hands that knew the weight of baskets, tools, children, and the dead. The sacred was not distant from daily life. It breathed beside the hearth. Power does not always arrive with a crown. Sometimes it gathers quietly around a fire, around an elder whose memory reaches farther than most, around a healer who knows the timing of herbs, around a person who can speak in the presence of the dead without trembling. Sometimes it forms in the space between households, when several families agree to follow one voice for a season, one plan for a journey, one pattern for a ceremony. On the chalklands, what authority may have begun like this? Not as a palace, not as a throne, not as a written law carried by messengers. It began in trust, obligation, age, skill, memory, and ritual importance. A person who knew when to sow, where to find water in a dry spell, how to settle a dispute, or how to remember the sequence of a ceremony could become necessary. Necessity is one of the oldest foundations of power. Yet necessity alone is not enough. To lead people through hard labour, a leader must also hold meaning. It is one thing to ask someone to mend a fence or bring cattle home. It is another to ask them to dig a great ditch, raise a bank, carry timber, move stone, prepare food for strangers, and give weeks of strength to a place that produces no harvest. Such work requires a deeper command. It requires sacred authority. We may imagine ritual specialists moving through this world with a care that others notice. They may have known particular songs, gestures, stories, taboos, and seasonal sequences. They may have watched the sky from youth and remembered where light touched the horizon at certain times. They may have kept genealogies in spoken form, linking families to ancestors whose names gave weight to land and ceremony. Their power was not unlimited. It had to be renewed. People had to believe in it, or at least accept it. A leader who failed too often could lose confidence. A ritual that did not hold the community together could weaken. Authority in such a society was likely woven through kinship, reputation, exchange, and the visible success of shared action. It was strong because it was social, but fragile because it lived inside human agreement. Councils may have mattered. Picture a group gathered at the edge of a settlement as evening lowers over the fields. Older women and men sit close to the fire. Younger adults stand behind them, listening. A dispute over cattle has become dangerous. A marriage alliance is being discussed. A journey to a sacred site must be organised. No one writes minutes. No one stamps a seal. Yet decisions are made, and the consequences move through many lives. In this world, law may have been remembered rather than written. It could exist as custom, precedent, shame, praise, compensation, oath, and fear of ancestral judgment. People knew what was owed because others remembered what had been given. A debt might be settled with animals, labour, food, marriage, or ritual gifts. A wrong might be answered through negotiation, exclusion, violence, or ceremony. Order was personal. Everyone knew faces. Everyone remembered stories. This made community powerful. It also made conflict intimate. A quarrel did not vanish into paperwork. It remained in voices, gestures, seating arrangements, delayed invitations, and careful looks across a feast. A family that felt dishonoured could carry that feeling for years. A leader's task was not merely to command, but to prevent small fractures from becoming open breaks. The same social networks that made great gatherings possible could also carry resentment. Fortifications and enclosures show another side of organisation. Across Neolithic Britain, earthworks with interrupted ditches appeared in certain places, sometimes on hills, sometimes in lowland settings. These were not simple forts in the later military sense. They could be gathering places, ritual spaces, exchange centres, or places where tension and negotiation took visible form. Their ditches were broken by causeways, as if inviting controlled movement rather than absolute exclusion. To dig such places required planning. People had to agree where to cut. They had to bring tools. They had to feed workers. They had to decide what objects might be deposited in the ground, what bones might be placed there, what feasts might happen nearby, and who had the right to enter at particular moments. A ditch is not only an absence of soil, it is a boundary made by collective will. Boundaries create authority. A bank says, this side is not like that side. A ditch says, crossing must be noticed. A circle says, movement has order. A path says, approach matters. When these forms appear in earth and timber, they teach the body how to behave. They slow the foot. They direct the eye. They make space ceremonial before any word is spoken. The first power structures may therefore have been spatial as much as political. A person entering a sacred enclosure might feel authority in the arrangement itself. The open sky above, the cut chalk below, the controlled entry, the presence of others, the knowledge of ancestors, all work together. Leadership could be hidden inside the design of the movement. People followed a path because the path had been made meaningful. Taxes in the later sense did not exist, yet contribution did. Every household may have owed something at certain times. Food for a gathering, labour for earthwork, animals for sacrifice or feast, wood for fires, skins, cord, baskets, tools, or knowledge of a route. The obligations of belonging could be as real as any formal demand. To refuse might be remembered. To give generously might raise status. The administration was spoken, embodied, and repeated. Someone knew which families had promised cattle. Someone remembered which group must cut timber. Someone counted days until the sun reached the proper place. Someone oversaw the preparation of tools. Someone settled the order of arrival. Even without writing, complex organization can exist when memory is trained and responsibilities are distributed through kinship and ritual duty. Temples may not have looked like temples to modern eyes. A ring of posts, a cleared space, a mound, a tomb entrance, a spring, a pit filled with selected objects, a circle traced in chalk. All could hold sacred force. Roofs were not always required. The sky itself could be the ceiling. The horizon could be the wall. A place did not need a permanent priesthood in robes to become holy. It needed repeated attention and remembered rules. Warrior elites are harder to see in this early world, but strength still mattered. A person who controlled cattle, defended kin, displayed courage, or commanded labour would gain influence. Hunting skill, physical endurance, success in dangerous journeys, and the ability to protect people could all support status. Yet prestige was probably not built on violence alone. It rested on giving as well as taking, on hosting as well as threatening. Feasting may have been one of the great engines of authority. To feed many people is to display abundance. To slaughter cattle is to show wealth. To distribute meat is to create obligation. The host becomes central, not because a title has been written, but because everyone has eaten from his or her resources. A full belly can remember generosity. A shared feast can turn hierarchy into gratitude. Still, every system carries tension. Those who organize sacred labor may be honored, but also watched. Those who distribute food may be praised, but also envied. Those who speak for ancestors may comfort the living, but also control them. Beneath calm ceremony, questions may have stirred. Who decides where we dig? Who receives honor? Whose dead are remembered? Whose labor is taken for the sacred work? These questions are ancient. They belong to every society that asks some people to serve a purpose larger than themselves. The first power structures around Stonehenge's world did not need stone palaces to be real. They lived in obligations, pathways, memories, ritual roles, and gatherings where human bodies moved according to designs older than any one person. By dusk, the council fire burns low, voices soften, decisions have been made. Beyond the houses, cattle settle into darkness. Above the plain, the stars emerge one by one. Somewhere, a child listens to adults speak of work to come, of a sacred place, of duties owed, of ancestors watching from beyond the visible world. The child may not understand everything, but the pattern enters memory. Power has begun. No name survives for the person who first gave the work its human voice. Perhaps there was no single person. Perhaps the idea moved through many mouths, refined by elders, carried by families, strengthened by ritual specialists, and accepted slowly by communities that had gathered on the plain for generations. Yet history often turns around a figure we can almost see, even when we cannot name them. Not a king in a palace, not a commander on a horse, a presence beside the fire, a watcher of horizons, a keeper of remembered order. Let us imagine such a figure carefully. He may have been old, though not necessarily. Age gives authority, but vision can burn in a younger body too. She may have been a woman whose knowledge of birth, burial, illness, and season gave her words unusual weight. The leader may have been a council voice, a ritual expert, a mediator, or one chosen only for particular ceremonies. We should not force a later model of monarchy onto this world. Power here could be shared, situational, and woven through kin. Still, someone had to persuade. Someone had to stand before others and say, in effect, This place must be marked. This work must continue. These hands must return. The dead are not fully honoured. The sky has not yet been answered. The land has given us a sign, and we must shape that sign into something that can endure. Such words would not be casual. They would be spoken in a world where labour was precious. Everybody had tasks. Every absence from field, herd, house, and workshop had a cost. To ask for a monument was to ask people to delay other needs. It was to place unseen meaning above immediate hunger. Only a powerful idea, carried by a trusted voice, could do that. Maybe this leader had survived a crisis, a winter of hunger, a sickness among cattle, a death that tore through a family of importance, a quarrel between groups that nearly turned violent, a strange season when the sun seemed weak, the harvest uncertain, and old reassurances no longer sufficient. In such moments, communities search for someone who can restore pattern. They seek a person who can connect suffering to meaning. The visionary does not invent the sacred from nothing. They gather scattered feelings already present: the fear of death, the need for return, the awe of the horizon, the brightness of chalk, the memory of ancestors, the importance of distant stone, the desire of separate groups to become one people, if only for a ceremony. A leader gives form to what many have felt but no one has yet made visible. Picture the person standing at dawn, cloaked dark with dew, watching light spread over the plain. Around them, others wait. Some are convinced, some are uncertain. A few may resent the demand. A man with sore hands may wonder why the dead require so much from the living. A woman counting stored grain may think of winter. Young workers may be drawn by excitement, by obligation, or by the chance to be seen. Sacred projects are never made by pure belief alone. They are made by mixed human motives. The leader knows this. They do not speak only of duty. They speak of memory. They speak of those who walk the land before the living. They speak of the sun returning after darkness. They speak of families joined through shared effort. They speak of a place where the living may approach the dead without being swallowed by grief. They speak of a work that will make scattered people visible to themselves. In the eyes of listeners, ambition becomes piety. That transformation is dangerous and powerful. When a human plan is understood as sacred necessity, ordinary limits begin to loosen. People will travel farther. They will carry more. They will accept hunger, fatigue, and pain with less complaint. They will teach children that the work is not merely work, but belonging made solid. The visionary may also have been a practical mind. It is tempting to imagine only ceremony. But great monuments require cold attention to detail. Where will the workers sleep? Who will bring food? How many baskets are needed? Which families must send labour? Where are the antler picks stored? Who repairs broken tools? Who settles disputes when tired bodies lose patience? A sacred dream without organisation fades into smoke. So the first great leader must have stood between worlds. 1 foot in ritual, 1 foot in logistics. They had to know the language of ancestors and the weight of a digging tool. They had to command silence during ceremony and noise during work. They had to understand that a monument is built not only through inspiration, but through repeated arrangements of food, time, materials, and trust. There may have been resistance. A community from a neighbouring valley might refuse to send workers. Another might argue for a different place. Some might say the old tombs were enough, that the ancestors already had houses of stone and earth. Others might fear that gathering too many groups in one place would sharpen rivalries. Sacred unity can conceal competition. The visionary would have needed patience, persuasion, and perhaps the ability to compromise without losing the central idea. What made this person convincing? Perhaps they possessed rare knowledge of the sky. They could point to the horizon and predict where the sun would stand at a turning of the year. They could remember the cycle of moon and season better than others. To people whose lives depended on the seasonal order, such knowledge carried authority. It did not need to be written. It could be demonstrated. Or perhaps the leader's power came from descent. They may have belonged to a lineage associated with burial places, cattle wealth, or old rights to the land. In a world where ancestry mattered, some voices carried the weight of many dead. When such a person spoke, listeners heard not only one throat, but a line of remembered kin behind it. Yet vision can be lonely, Imagine the figure awake while others sleep, watching embers fade in the dark. Outside, wind crosses the plain. The decision has been made, but success is not certain. People may come once and fail to return. The work may be interrupted. A death, a bad harvest, a quarrel, or a failed ceremony may weaken confidence. The leader must carry doubt where others expect certainty. This is one of the quiet burdens of authority. To speak of order while fearing disorder, to promise meaning while knowing how easily human effort breaks, to ask for sacrifice while hearing the cough of a hungry child. The unnamed visionary may never have seen the monument reach its greatest form. That, too, feels possible. Ancient projects often outlive their first minds. A person can begin a pattern that others inherit, reshape, and misunderstand. The original intention may change even while the place grows more powerful. The founder becomes memory, then story, then perhaps an ancestor whose exact words no one can repeat, but their achievement remains profound. They helped turn a location into a commitment. They helped gather human energy around a place under the sky. They helped make labour meaningful enough to continue beyond convenience. They may have stood in mud and cold with no certainty of success, asking people to believe that something invisible could be made durable. In that sense, the first great leader of Stonehenge was not great because we know their name. They are great because the name vanished, yet the act remained. The grass swallowed their footprints, their voice faded, their bones returned to earth or fire, but the pattern they helped set in motion continued to pull people across distance, into gathering, into effort, into a shared dream shaped by chalk, timber, stone, and sky. For a moment, in the low light of morning, we may see them turn from the horizon toward the waiting people. No crown, no inscription, only breath in cold air, a hand raised for silence, and a command carried by belief. The first great victory was not a battle against another army. It was a victory over uncertainty. At the edge of the open plain, people gathered with tools of antler, bone, wood, and stone. Facing a task that must have seemed almost absurd in its ambition. The ground had to be marked, the line had to be followed, the labour had to continue even when backs ached, palms split, and the first excitement faded into the harder rhythm of endurance. The victory began when the circle held. A sacred plan can fail in many ways. People can disagree about where the boundary should lie. Workers can abandon the effort. A poor season can scatter families back to their homes. A death can be taken as an omen against the work. Yet the ditch was cut, the bank was raised, and the place began to separate itself from ordinary land. That persistence was the turning point. The sound of digging carried across the grass. Antler picks struck chalk with a heavy, muted force. Wooden shovels scraped loose fragments into baskets. People moved in lines, lifting the white earth and carrying it outward. The work was repetitive, but repetition can become ceremonial. Each basket emptied onto the growing bank made the shape clearer. Each day gave the place more authority. A ditch is a strange kind of monument. It is made by removing rather than adding. It appears because something has been taken away. Yet that absence can be powerful. The cut in the earth created a ring that controlled how bodies approached the centre. It made people aware of crossing. It made the ground speak in a new grammar, saying here and not here, inside and outside, ordinary and set apart. The bank gleamed when the chalk was fresh. In sunlight, it would have shone pale against the darker grass, visible from a distance like a deliberate wound. In rain, it would have softened and darkened, then brightened again when dry. Its colour alone may have made the place feel transformed. The land had been opened, and its hidden whiteness had been brought into the world. But the earthwork was not merely decoration. It was a declaration that people could work together on a scale beyond household need. No single family required such a circle to survive. No field demanded it. No herd needed it. The project belonged to a different order of life, the order of shared belief, public memory, and social power. When the first earthwork stood complete, a community had proven something about itself. It had proven that it could gather. That may sound simple. It was not. To gather means to trust that others will come. It means preparing food beyond the needs of one household. It means accepting people from different kin groups into a common space. It means negotiating obligation, status, resentment, generosity, and ritual control. A monument may appear silent, but its construction is full of human voices, and not all of them agree. At the edge of the work, arguments likely rose and faded. Someone may have complained that a section was badly cut. Someone may have accused another family of sending too few workers. Someone may have worried that the ceremony had been performed incorrectly. Fatigue sharpens the tongue. Sacred labour does not remove human irritation. It gives irritation a larger stage. Yet the work continued. That is the quiet wonder. The circle did not require perfect harmony. It required enough agreement to survive imperfection. The people did not need to think alike in every detail. They needed to accept that this place mattered, and that the cost of making it mattered too. In that acceptance, the first great victory of Stonehenge took shape. Within or near the earthwork, pits were dug. Some may have held posts. Some may have held deposits. Some later held cremated human remains, turning the place into one of the most significant burial grounds of its age. The presence of the dead changed everything. If ashes and bones were placed here with care, then the circle was not just a boundary for the living. It was a meeting ground between those who breathed and those who had become memory. Fire entered the story, a body reduced to bone fragments and ashes not simply disposed of. Cremation is transformation. Flesh becomes smoke. Smoke rises into sky. Bone is gathered, selected, moved, and placed. The dead pass through heat before entering earth. Such acts require attention, and attention creates meaning. The circle may have held grief in a public form, giving mourning a shape that others could witness. Imagine a ceremony at dusk. The air smells of smoke and damp chalk. People stand close, silent except for small movements, a child shifting weight from one foot to the other, an elder breathing with effort, dogs held back at the edge. In the centre, remains are treated with care. Perhaps names are spoken, perhaps no names are needed, because everyone knows whose absence has opened inside the community. The victory over uncertainty now becomes a victory over death, though not a complete one. No society defeats death, but societies make ways to live with it. They give it forms, paths, houses, boundaries, and seasons. They place the dead where the living can return to them without being overwhelmed. They create ceremonies so grief does not remain wild and shapeless. The early monument may have served this need, holding the dead within a landscape that made memory visible. The first major turning point, then, was both practical and emotional. The people learned that the plain could carry a collective burden. They learned that the earth could be shaped into sacred order. They learned that a gathering place could hold labour, ceremony, and ancestral presence at once. Once such knowledge exists, it invites enlargement. A boundary can become a centre. A centre can become a destination. A destination can become a world. There is a moment in every great human project when it stops being an experiment. Perhaps that moment came when the circle was completed and people walked its edge in silence. Perhaps it came when the first important dead were placed there. Perhaps it came when groups returned in a later season and found the bank still visible, the ditch still holding its shadow, the place still waiting. Continuity is a powerful form of proof. The earthwork endured through weather. Rain filled hollows. Frost touched exposed chalk. Grass began to grow over the disturbed ground. Footsteps wore paths. The fresh wounds softened into landscape, but did not vanish. That mattered. A place that survives one season can become part of expectation. A place that survives many seasons can become tradition. Children who first watched the digging would later return as adults. They would point to the bank and say, "Perhaps, I remember when this was made." Then, years later, others would hear the story from them. Memory would attach itself to the circle, not as an abstract record, but as family testimony. The monument would become older while still being alive in spoken recollection. This is how history begins to accelerate, not because time moves faster, but because memory gains a fixed point. People can organize themselves around a place that already has a past. The circle becomes a container for stories. Each ceremony adds another layer. Each burial deepens the claim. Each return confirms that the work was not wasted. The first great victory was not the final form that later eyes would know. It was the successful creation of sacred permanence. The people cut earth, raised chalk, gathered the dead, and gave the plain a centre. They proved that the invisible could be marked, that grief could be held, and that scattered communities could act as one body, if the meaning was strong enough. No trumpet sounded over the chalk. No written record declared success. Only the pale bank stood in the fading light, and the ditch curved quietly around the chosen ground. People looked upon it and understood that something had changed. The land had accepted their mark. The dead had been given a place. The living now had a reason to return. The stones from the far west entered the story like travellers carrying another landscape inside them. They were not the largest stones that would ever stand on the plain, but they were among the strangest. Their colour, their texture, and their origin set them apart. They came from hills far away, from a region of hard rock, rain, springs, ridges, and sea winds. To bring them into the chalk country was to do more than move material. It was to draw distant places into one sacred centre. The journey itself must have mattered. A stone taken from its source is never only weight, it carries memory of the place where it was found, the people who knew that place, the routes crossed to remove it, and the stories told during the labour. If a community chose to bring bluestones from the west, then distance was not an inconvenience to be avoided. Distance was part of the meaning. Imagine the first selection. A group stands among outcrops in the Preseli Hills. Mist drifts between slopes. The ground is uneven and damp. The stones rise in natural pillars, fractured by weather, waiting as if already half prepared by the earth. Hands touch the surfaces. Voices discuss which piece can be freed, which shape is suitable, which stone has presence, which one seems to answer the purpose. No metal wedges bite into the rock. The work is done with stone tools, wooden levers, patience, fire perhaps, water perhaps, and knowledge built from repeated attempts. A stone is loosened slowly, not conquered in a single dramatic gesture. People listen to cracks. They watch pressure. They shift weight. They learn the stubbornness of rock through aching arms and failed effort. When the stone finally gives, the victory is quiet and dangerous. A heavy pillar can crush a foot, break a leg, kill a worker, or splinter in a way that ruins weeks of labour. The moment of release requires control. People shout instructions. Ropes tighten. Bodies lean. Wood creaks. The stone settles onto prepared supports. And for a breath everyone understands that the hardest part has not ended. It has only changed form. Now the land must be crossed, whether by overland routes, waterways, or a combination of both. The movement demanded coordination beyond the ordinary demands of travel. The stone had to be secured to a sledge or frame. Ropes had to be twisted and tested. Timber had to be cut. Food had to be prepared. The route had to be known, negotiated, and survived. The stone did not travel alone. It pulled a whole human system behind it. At every difficult slope, belief was tested. Mud could stop progress. Rain could make ropes slick. A river crossing could become a crisis. A broken timber runner could halt the journey. A dispute between groups could delay movement for days. The stone was heavy in the body, but also heavy in the mind. Each obstacle asked the same question. Is this still worth doing? The answer must have been yes. Step by step, the stone moved away from the hills of its birth. The people who travelled with it may have felt a strange grief, or pride, or both. To remove something sacred from one place and carry it toward another is to create a bond between them. The source is not abandoned, it is extended. A piece of the western landscape is given a new horizon. Along the route, others may have joined. Some came to help. Some came to watch. Some came to trade food for stories. Children stared at the moving stone and remembered it for the rest of their lives. A traveller seeing such a procession from a ridge might have stood still, uncertain whether he was witnessing labour, ceremony, or both. In truth, the difference may not have existed. The movement of stone became a procession. Ropes stretched forward like tendons, feet pressed into wet ground. Voices kept rhythm, pull, rest, brace, lift, pull again. The sound was not the clean sound of machines. It was human breath, wood scraping earth, rope fibres straining, and the dull shifting of stone over supports. Progress may have been painfully slow, but slowness does not mean failure. Slowness can make efforts sacred. Knights on the road would have carried their own power. The stone lay beside the fire, dark and silent. People slept near it as if guarding an animal, a guest, or an ancestor. Smoke curled upward. Sparks drifted into the dark. Stories of the western hills were told to those who had never seen them. The stone became a listener at the edge of the camp, absorbing speech, fear, laughter, and fatigue. Food would have been consumed in great quantities. Workers needed grain, meat, water, and rest. Cattle may have been driven to support the journey. Communities along the route may have hosted or contributed, strengthening ties through shared participation. A stone's movement could create a chain of obligation stretching across landscapes. By the time it reached the plain, it belonged not only to those who quarried it, but to everyone who had helped it move. Its arrival must have changed the atmosphere of the sacred place. The Chalkland people saw a stone unlike local stone. It brought colour from elsewhere, hardness from a distant geology, and proof of extraordinary commitment. Perhaps hands reached to touch it. Perhaps elders inspected it in silence. Perhaps the exhausted travellers stood aside while others approached with reverence. The stone had crossed a world. Its presence testified to human unity over distance. More stones followed. That is the true sign of momentum. One stone might be an experiment, a singular offering, a bold gesture. Many stones reveal continuity. The idea had taken root strongly enough to demand repetition. Routes were remembered, techniques improved. People learned where sledges failed, where rivers could be crossed, where extra hands were needed, where camps should be made. The impossible became a practiced difficulty. With each arrival, the monument's meaning widened. It no longer belonged only to the local plain. It connected chalk to western hills, local ancestry to distant source, visible ceremony to hidden journeys. The builders were creating a place that gathered landscapes as well as people. Stonehenge became not merely a point on the land, but a knot in a web of movement and memory. Such expansion likely carried social force. To command distant stone is to display influence. To gather labour from far places is to prove that relationships extend beyond the nearest valley. A community that could bring blue stones across such distance was announcing power in a form older than writing. Look, the stones seem to say, our reach is measured in footsteps, rivers, hills, and endurance. But power always has a cost. Someone strained beneath ropes, someone limped home injured, someone missed a harvest task, someone argued beside a stalled sledge in rain, someone died and was remembered along the way. The stones did not arrive by magic, nor by mystery alone. They arrived through bodies, plans, risks, and decisions repeated beyond comfort. That is what makes them more astonishing, not less. The far western stones turned the sacred landscape into a place of convergence. They gave the monument a new depth, joining regions that ordinary life might keep apart. They showed that distance could be overcome when meaning was strong enough. And as the stones stood under the open sky, their silence held not only the place where they had been set, but the long road that had brought them there. The plain had gained something it did not naturally possess. It had gained the memory of mountains. To make power last, belief had to become method. A sacred idea could gather people for a season, but stone required more than inspiration. It required systems, quiet systems. Systems held in memory, hand skill, repeated practice, and the careful organisation of bodies in space. No ink recorded the orders, no engineer left a drawing, yet the work itself reveals a mind that understood sequence, pressure, balance, and time. The impossible becomes possible only when divided. First, the stone must be found, then it must be freed, then shaped, transported, positioned, raised, secured, and joined. Each stage carries its own dangers. If one part fails, all later parts are threatened. The builders needed not only strength, but an understanding of process. They had to know what must happen first, what must wait, and what must never be rushed. A great stone lying on the ground is difficult. A great stone standing upright is dangerous. A A great stone joined to another stone across the top is something else entirely. It asks the builders to think upward, not only across the land. It asks them to imagine stone as architecture, as a controlled relationship between weight and empty air. The lintel above the uprights is not merely placed, it is persuaded into balance. This persuasion begins with shaping. Stone can seem eternal, but in the hands of determined workers it can be altered. Sarsen, the hard sandstone found in the region, was worked with hammerstones, patience, and repeated blows. Surfaces were dressed, projections were reduced, shapes were regularized. The builders were not simply choosing stones and standing them in a rough ring. They were preparing them for a design. On some stones, joints were carved. Mortise and tenon, tongue and groove. These are terms from woodworking, but here the logic enters stone. Upright stones were shaped with raised knobs to fit into hollowed sockets beneath lintels. Curving lintels were linked end to end, creating a continuous ring with a subtle architectural intelligence. It is a startling thought that people accustomed to timber construction may have translated familiar craft into monumentality. Wood taught stone how to stand. This is one of the quiet revelations of the monument. The builders did not invent their solutions in isolation. They drew from a world of posts, beams, frames, shelters, and timber circles. A wooden structure can be cut, joined, adjusted, and replaced. Stone is less forgiving. To use timber logic in stone required imagination and courage. A mistake could not be undone easily. The work demanded measurement, not measurement in the modern language of diagrams and printed numbers, but measurement nonetheless. Cords could be stretched, pegs could be set, sightlines could be checked, distances could be paced and compared, repetition could refine accuracy. The human body, trained by habit, becomes a measuring instrument. The eye becomes disciplined through use. The circle itself required shared attention. To form a ring, each stone must belong to the whole. One misplaced setting affects the next. A slight error multiplies. The builders had to imagine the complete form while working on individual parts, a mental act that links practical craft with ceremonial vision. They saw not only the stone before them, but the invisible curve into which it must fit. Raising a stone may have begun with a pit. A deep socket was dug into the chalk, shaped so the stone could slide or pivot into position. One side might be sloped as a ramp, allowing the stone to be drawn upward. Ropes were fastened, timber supports were prepared. People gathered in teams, some pulled, some guided, some braced, some watched for danger and shouted warnings when the weight shifted. There was a moment of terror in every raising. The stone begins to move, slowly at first, then with a change in balance that everyone feels at once. Ropes strain, feet dig into earth. The base slides toward the socket. Timber creaks. Dust rises. If the stone tips too far, it can crush anything beneath it. If it twists, it can jam, crack, or fall. Human strength must meet gravity without angering it. When the stone settles upright, the sound is final, a heavy thud into chalk, a deep vibration through the ground. People step back, breathing hard, covered in dust. They look upward. What lay horizontal now stands between earth and sky. The transformation is physical, but also symbolic. A stone raised upright seems awake. It has become a presence. Then comes the harder question: how to lift the lintel. A horizontal stone must be brought high enough to rest across uprights. Perhaps earth ramps were built. Perhaps timber platforms rose in stages. Perhaps the stone was levered gradually upward, with supports inserted beneath it as it climbed. No single method needs to explain every action. The builders may have used several techniques, adapting to the shape, weight, and position of each piece. Here, patience mattered more than spectacle. The lintel may have risen by inches, lever, support, adjust, lever again. Each small gain secured before the next was attempted. The work could have taken days for a single stone. It required trust between those who pulled and those who braced, between those who commanded and those who obeyed, between those who watched the stone and those who felt only the strain in the rope. The system extended beyond the building site. Someone had to make rope strong enough for the work. Someone had to cut timber. Someone had to prepare sledges, rollers, frames, wedges, and supports. Someone had to keep tools repaired. Someone had to provide food and water. Someone had to manage rest, because exhausted workers make fatal mistakes. Engineering is never only the visible moment of lifting. It is everything that allows lifting to happen safely. Communication was part of the machinery. A shout at the wrong time could cause confusion. A signal misunderstood could injure many. Teams needed common rhythms and commands. Pulling together is not only a matter of strength, it is timing. 100 people pulling out of rhythm waste force. A smaller number pulling as one can move astonishing weight. Perhaps songs helped. A repeated chant can set pace. It can calm fear. It can turn scattered effort into a single pulse. The sound of voices rising with strain may have filled the plain as ropes tightened and stones shifted. In such moments, ceremony and engineering were not separate. Rhythm held both the body and the sacred purpose together. The builders also understood durability. A monument that collapses too soon becomes a warning rather than a triumph. Sockets had to be deep enough. Stones had to be seated securely. The curves of the lintels had to align. Uprights had to bear weight without leaning beyond recovery. Stability was part of meaning. A sacred structure must endure if it is to speak beyond the season of its making. Yet every durable system hides uncertainty. No one could know how long the stones would stand. No one could know which joints would weather well, which foundations would settle, which ceremonies would continue, which meanings would be remembered. The builders worked for permanence in a world where nothing living remains permanent. That tension gives the monument much of its quiet power. They created order from weight. They turned local stone into a ring, distant stone into a presence, timber knowledge into stone architecture, and scattered labour into a coordinated system. There were no engines, but there was intelligence. No steel, but discipline. No written blueprint, but design held in trained minds and repeated hands. By the time the stone stood joined beneath the sky, power had become visible. Not power shouted from a throne, but power organized through method. The monument showed that people could command matter, distance, labor, memory, and direction. It showed that belief could become engineering, and engineering could become sacred form. For a while, the world seemed ordered. The stones stood because people had learned how to make them stand. They endured because many small decisions had been made correctly in silence, dust, danger, and patience. Beneath the grandeur was a hidden system of ropes, food, tools, commands, measurements, and human trust. That hidden system was the true architecture. At the height of gathering, the plain was not silent. It breathed with fires, animals, footsteps, voices, and smoke. People arrived from different valleys and distant settlements, bringing with them the smell of wet wool, wood ash, cattle hide, grain dust, and long travel. The open chalkland changed as they came. What had seemed spacious and empty became crowded with movement, expectation, and watchful order. This was not a city. There were no stone streets, no market gates, no palace walls, no written proclamations nailed to public doors. Yet for a season, the landscape could feel like a great temporary capital of memory. Paths thickened with footprints, camps appeared, hearths were lit, animals lowed in the cold air. People who rarely saw one another stood face to face beneath the same enormous sky. Near the river and across the surrounding land, timber structures may have formed part of this ceremonial world. Wood has a different presence from stone. It smells alive even when cut. It rots, cracks, burns, and returns to soil. If stone seems to speak of endurance, timber speaks of the living body, of houses, warmth, growth, and decay. Together, wood and stone may have shaped a landscape of movement between life and death. The gatherings likely followed rhythms of season. Winter has often drawn attention because the turning of the year would have carried deep emotional force. When days were short and darkness pressed close, people watched for the return of light. In that season, cattle might be slaughtered because keeping every animal through winter was costly. Meat could be shared in abundance, not only as food, but as ceremony. To feast in the dark half of the year is to answer fear with fire. Imagine the approach at dusk. The air is sharp, the grass is damp, smoke rises in many thin columns, blue against a fading sky. A family reaches the edge of a gathering place after days of walking. They hear voices before they see faces. Dogs bark. Children point toward the silhouettes of posts or stones. The adults grow quiet, not because they are unwelcome, but because arrival itself has meaning. At such gatherings, the world became larger and smaller at once. Larger because people encountered strangers, distant accents, unfamiliar ornaments, new stories, and goods from places they had never seen. Smaller because all those distances were drawn into one shared field of ritual and food. A person might learn that a marriage had been arranged beyond the next river, that a lineage had lost an elder, that a rare stone axe had changed hands, that a distant community had suffered hunger or enjoyed plenty. News travelled with bodies. There were no letters to carry grief ahead of arrival, no tablets to record promises. A face brought the message, a voice made it real. Around fires, people exchanged knowledge of weather, animals, births, deaths, disputes, roots, tools, and omens. The gathering was not only sacred, it was social intelligence. It allowed scattered communities to know the condition of their world. Markets, if we may use the word carefully, were probably woven into ceremony. Objects moved from hand to hand. Fine flint, pottery, hides, beads, tools, food, pigments, and perhaps rare materials passed through networks of gift and obligation. Exchange was not always simple trade. A gift could bind two families. A shared animal could settle tension. An ornament could mark alliance. To give was to create memory. To receive was to accept relationship. Feasting gave this world its warmth. Large animals were slaughtered, butchered, cooked, and shared. The smell of roasting meat would have drifted over the plain, rich and heavy. Bones piled near eating places. Fat hissed in flame. Hands reached into bowls or onto hides where portions were laid out. People ate together in ways that made hierarchy visible. Some portions may have honoured certain people. Some seating arrangements may have reflected rank, kinship, or ritual role. And yet, beneath the order, joy must have existed. Children ran between adults. Young people noticed one another across firelight. Stories grew more animated after eating. Laughter broke out near the edges of formal spaces. Someone sang. Someone boasted. Someone repeated an old tale everyone already knew, and still the listeners leaned closer. A sacred landscape does not remove human warmth. It concentrates it. The stones themselves would have altered the mood. To stand near them was to feel scale in the body. A person could place a hand on cold stone and sense its hardness, its distance from ordinary tools, its refusal to behave like wood or flesh. The upright forms changed the movement of air and sight. They framed sky. They created shadows. They made people look upward. At sunrise or sunset, light transformed them. The stones did not need to move in order to seem alive. Their surfaces changed with weather and hour, grey in mist, gold at low sun, dark in rain, silver beneath moonlight. A monument in open land is never exactly the same twice, because the sky keeps rewriting it. Those who gathered repeatedly would have known this shifting presence well. Processions may have given ceremony its shape. People moving together along a path are not the same as people wandering freely. A directed approach creates anticipation. It tells the body that something is unfolding. The pace slows. Voice is quiet. Feet follow the same line worn by others. The destination grows larger with every step. By the time the sacred centre is reached, the mind has already begun to change. Music may have filled the air, not music preserved in notation, but rhythm, voice, clapping, bone, wood, skin, and breath. A chant carried across open ground can bind a crowd. A drumbeat, if used, can steady movement. A repeated phrase can enter the body until walking, singing, and remembering become one act. Even silence, when held by many people at once, becomes a kind of music. Daily life did not stop during ceremony. Someone still repaired a torn strap. Someone still soothed a crying child. Someone still searched for a missing dog. Someone still scraped a hide, checked a cooking pit, fetched water, or tended an animal. The sacred and the ordinary existed side by side, not as enemies, but as companions. A mother might hush a child while elders performed a rite. A tired worker might fall asleep with the sound of ritual voices in the distance. The golden age of this landscape was not golden because it was easy. It was golden because many forms of human life converged with unusual intensity. Labour, memory, ancestry, exchange, courtship, grief, politics, astronomy, craft, and food all met under the same sky. The monument did not stand apart from these activities, it gave them gravity. It helped hold the gathering together as a shared experience. For a while, the plain became a world centre, not the centre of all lands, not the centre of every people, but the centre of a meaningful horizon. Those who came there may have returned home changed. They carried stories of the stones, of feasts, of strange visitors, of solemn rites, of marriages agreed, of arguments settled, of the dead remembered, of light touching stone at the turning of the year. Memory travelled outward again, back to houses, fields, rivers, and wooded valleys, back to children too young to attend, to elders too frail to walk, to neighbours who waited for news. The gathering continued in retelling. A feast could be tasted again through story. A ceremony could be seen again in the mind. A stone touched by hand could remain cold in memory long after the journey home. This was the monument at its most alive. Not only raised stone, but returning footsteps. Not only sacred design, but smoke, food, voices, animals, and human attention gathered in season. The power of the place lay in its ability to make scattered lives feel joined, if only for a little while, inside an order wider than any single household. Under the winter stars, fires burned low. The stones stood dark against the sky. Around them, people slept, whispered, watched, mourned, and dreamed. The plain held them all, living and dead, near and far, known and unknown, gathered into a circle of time that seemed, for one calm moment, unbroken. The people who gathered beneath the open sky did not see the universe as an empty space. They saw a living order. Above them, the sun travelled with steady power. The moon changed its face and returned. Stars appeared in their seasons, bright and patient, as if fixed to a pattern beyond human reach. Below them lay earth, water, roots, bones, and the remembered dead. Between these realms stood the living, fragile and temporary, trying to understand their place. Stonehenge belonged to this kind of seeing. Its alignments were not accidental decorations. They drew attention to moments when the sun reached the extremes of its yearly journey, especially the deep drama of midsummer and midwinter. To watch the sun rise or set along a carefully marked line was to witness more than astronomy. It was to witness order returning. It was to see the sky behave as memory said it would. For farming and herding people, this mattered deeply. The year was not a smooth circle of comfort. It was a passage through danger. The dark half carried cold, hunger, and the slaughter of animals that could not be kept alive through winter. The light half brought growth, warmth, and labour in the fields. Each turning point held practical importance, but also emotional power. The sun's return could feel like mercy. Imagine the midwinter dusk. The air bites the skin. Breath hangs pale. People stand close together, wrapped in skins and woven cloth, watching the low light move toward the horizon. The stones are dark shapes against a fading sky. Fires wait behind them. Children feel the tension in adult bodies and become still. The sun sinks slowly, and the whole crowd seems to lean into silence. Then the light touches the marked way. For a moment, the sky, stones, and watching people form one arrangement. Nothing has been written, but everything is being read. The sun has reached its place. The year has turned. The darkness will not last forever. To those standing there, This may have been proof that the world still held together. Yet the monument was not only about the sun, death stood close to its meaning. Cremated remains found within the sacred landscape suggest that the dead were not peripheral to the place. They were part of its force. The living may have approached the stones not only to observe the heavens, but to maintain relationships with ancestors whose presence helped define community, land, and obligation. In many ancient worlds, the dead are not gone in the way modern speech often imagines. They become powerful, dangerous, protective, or necessary. They may bless crops, guard boundaries, witness agreements, or demand remembrance. A neglected ancestor can become a source of unease. A properly honoured one can become a pillar of identity. For people without written deeds or official archives, ancestry itself can become the memory of the rightful belonging. Burial customs reveal a worldview of transformation. A body burned on a pyre changes state. Flesh becomes smoke and heat. Bone remains, whitened, broken, altered. The fragments may be collected with care, placed in a pit, wrapped in organic material, or deposited with ritual attention. Fire separates the dead from ordinary decay. It turns the body into something handled differently, something purified, reduced, and made suitable for another kind of existence. The smoke may have mattered. Rising from the pyre, it joined the air and vanished into the sky. The bones returned to earth. In this movement, the dead crossed more than one boundary. They were not simply buried below, they touched above and below, flame and soil, breath and chalk. The monument, standing between earth and sky, may have given this passage a visible frame. The stones themselves could have carried symbolic oppositions. Hard and enduring, they were unlike flesh. Upright and silent, they resembled presences more than objects. The great stones may have suggested permanence, ancestry, or the fixed order of the cosmos. If nearby timber settings represented the living world of houses, growth, and decay, then stone might have spoken of the dead, the eternal, or the realm beyond change. We must be careful. No one left a written theology. No ancient priest explained the rites in words we can read. Every interpretation must remain humble. But the pattern of the place allows certain possibilities to breathe. Sun, season, death, gathering, direction, procession, and stone were woven together. Whatever the exact beliefs, the monument organized experience around powers larger than the individual body. Myths may have lived in the stories told around fires. Perhaps people spoke of first ancestors who came from distant lands, of stones born in sacred hills, of a sun that travelled a path through darkness, of spirits beneath springs, of animals that crossed between worlds, of a sky order mirrored by human ceremony. These stories are lost, but their absence does not mean they were simple. Oral worlds can carry immense complexity, held in rhythm, image, repetition, and performance. A child listening at night would learn the universe through story, not as a list of doctrines, but as scenes, a journey, a death, a return, a warning, a marriage between land and sky, an animal that knows the hidden path, a stone that remembers. Over time, such stories shape behaviour. They teach where to stand, when to be silent, whom to honour, and why a place should be approached with care. Education was therefore sacred as well as practical. Children learned to grind grain and tend animals, but also to recognise signs. They learned the proper conduct around burial places. They learned which elders held certain knowledge. They learned seasonal expectations not only through observation, but through ritual repetition. The sky was a teacher, but the community translated its lessons. Social hierarchy may have been justified through this worldview. Those who knew the rites could guide others. Those whose ancestors were honoured in important places may have held special standing. Those able to host feasts or command labour could present their influence as service to the sacred order. Power often becomes more stable when it seems aligned with the cosmos. If the stones reflected the sky, then those who controlled ceremonies near them controlled more than a gathering. Gender roles may also have been shaped by sacred ideas. The evidence does not allow simple certainty, but daily life, fertility, birth, cattle, ancestry, burial, and seasonal renewal all offered ways for women and men to hold different forms of importance. A person who helped bring children into the world stood close to mystery. A person who prepared the dead stood close to mystery. A person who remembered lineages stood close to power. The sacred was not confined to one task. The universe they imagined was probably filled with thresholds, doorways between house and outside, entrances to tombs, river crossings, the edge of a ditch, the line of a horizon, dawn, dusk, birth, death, winter turning toward light. These were moments and places where one state became another. Stonehenge gathered many thresholds into one landscape, making transition visible and repeatable. This may explain its deep hold on the mind. A human life is full of uncertainty. Children are born, elders die, animals sicken, fields fail, alliances break, bodies weaken. The sky, by contrast, appears to move with solemn regularity. To align a sacred place with celestial order is to place fragile human life inside a larger pattern. It does not remove sorrow. It gives sorrow a frame. Under moonlight, the stones would seem different again. Their edges soften, shadows lengthen, the spaces between them become dark passages. The sky fills with stars beyond counting. A watcher standing alone might feel the dead near, not as horror, but as depth. The living world becomes thin at night, and old places hold silence with unusual strength. In that silence, worldview becomes feeling, not an argument, not a doctrine, a sensation that earth, sky, stone, ancestor, and season are joined in ways the body understands before words arrive. The builders and gatherers of Stonehenge may have lived inside such a sensation, returning to the stones because the place made the world feel ordered, mournful, dangerous, and whole. The cosmos moved above them. The dead rested near them. The stone stood between. At its strongest, Stonehenge did not need to speak. It stood, that was enough, on the open plain, where wind moved freely and the sky spread without obstruction. The monument held its ground with a confidence that must have seemed almost beyond human. The great sarsen uprights rose from the chalk like fixed beings. The lintels rested above them, joining stone to stone in a ring of astonishing control. Within that order, taller arrangements framed space with deliberate force. This was power made visible, not the quick power of a shouted command, not the uncertain authority of a living leader, but something slower and more convincing. The stones were heavy. They were difficult to move. They were harder still to shape and raise. Their very presence announced that many people, across many seasons, had accepted one purpose. The monument was proof of agreement made durable. A traveller approaching from the surrounding country would see the stones gradually emerge from the land. First, a dark unevenness on the horizon, then upright forms, then the impossible truth of their height. As the traveller came closer, the structure would gather detail. The ring would reveal its openings and shadows. The lintels would show their careful joins. The inner stones would stand like a more secret presence within the larger form. The monument did not merely occupy space, it controlled approach, attention, and imagination. The strongest power is often the power to make people slow down. Stonehenge did that. It changed the pace of the body. Voices may have lowered near it. Steps may have become more deliberate. People would have watched where others stood, who approached first, who waited, who touched stone, who remained outside. Sacred architecture creates behavior by shaping expectation. Even without walls, the place could command. Its reach extended beyond the stones themselves. Communities knew of it. Roots bent toward it. Stories travelled outward from it. A person who had never seen the monument could still hear of its size, its ceremonies, its distant stones, its winter gatherings, and the great labour behind it. Fame does not require writing. It only requires repeated telling. In an oral world, a powerful place can live vividly in the minds of people who have never stood within it. This influence was wealth of another kind. Not coins, not stored metal, not tribute measured in written accounts. It was social wealth, ritual wealth, the ability to draw bodies, animals, food, craft, and attention toward one place. A society that can concentrate effort can also concentrate meaning. That concentration is a form of control. even when it wears the face of ceremony, at maximum power. The monument likely unified many layers of life. It held the dead and addressed the sky. It displayed engineering skill and social reach. It linked local land with distant materials. It gave seasonal gathering a centre and memory a visible shape. It may have settled disputes, confirmed alliances, marked transitions, and honoured ancestors. Its greatness lay not in one function, but in its capacity to hold many functions at once. This is why simple explanations feel too small. A calendar alone does not explain the burial. A burial ground alone does not explain the solar alignments. A symbol of unity alone does not explain the precision of stone joints. An engineering triumph alone does not explain repeated ritual attention. The monument's strength came from being many things woven into one physical form. Such complexity was not confusion. It was power. A great sacred place can be layered without losing authority. The same stone can frame a sunset, honour a dead lineage, impress visitors, and remind workers of past labour. The same gathering can be a feast, a ceremony, a political meeting, a marriage market, and a memorial. Human beings rarely separate life into clean categories when standing before what they consider sacred. The landscape around Stonehenge strengthened this power. The monument was not isolated from ridges, barrows, avenues, timber places, river paths, and older marks in the earth. Each feature added depth to the others. A burial mound on the horizon could pull memory outward. A processional route could give movement meaning. The river could connect approach to purification, transition, or travel. The plain became an ordered field of signs. To stand there at a major gathering must have felt like standing inside a living map. People knew where to move. They knew where not to move. They knew which directions mattered. They knew that some spaces held more weight than others. Around them were relatives, allies, rivals, elders, children, animals, fires, and the dead. Above them was the turning sky. At the centre stood stone, answering change with stillness. Confidence can feel eternal while it lasts. Perhaps that is the most haunting part. At its height, the system surrounding Stonehenge may have seemed secure. The stones stood, the ceremonies continued, the roots were remembered, the gathering still drew people, the dead were honoured. The sun returned along its path. The world, though dangerous, appeared to hold its pattern. And yet power at its greatest can hide its own fragility. The more effort a sacred centre requires, the more it depends on continued belief. The more communities it gathers, the more relationships must be maintained. The more meanings it holds, the more vulnerable it becomes to change in any one of them. A monument of stone may endure, but the social world that gives it life is made of breath. Still, in its full strength, Stonehenge must have seemed unanswerable. The ring of stone turned open ground into authority. The lintels made height into order. The great uprights transformed human labour into a presence that could outlast individual lives. Every surface held the memory of hammering. Every socket held the intelligence of planning. Every aligned space held the discipline of watching the heavens. Around it, people could feel part of something larger than themselves. This feeling's one of the most powerful tools any society possesses. A person who has pulled a rope, carried food, walked a ceremonial path, watched the sun through stones, and eaten with distant kin does not merely attend a ritual. They become part of its proof. Their own body remembers that the community is real. The monument made belonging physical. It gave a dispersed world a centre that could be seen, touched, and returned to. It made alliances more than spoken promises. It gave grief a place. It gave the sky a frame. It gave leaders a stage and ordinary people a role. In this sense, its maximum power was not only in the stones, but in the human experience gathered around them. At sunset, the structure would darken gradually. The tops of the stones might catch light while the bases fell into shadow. Birds crossed the sky. Smoke from distant fires spread thin across the plain. People stood in small groups, their faces warmed by low sun, their bodies tired from ceremony, travel, or work. For a moment, The monument seemed to hold the day itself before letting it pass into night. There, at the height of its meaning, Stonehenge was more than built stone. It was reach. It was memory. It was order standing against uncertainty. But beneath that strength lay a quiet truth known to every human society. Even if no one wishes to say it aloud, what people build together must also be believed together, and belief, like fire, must be tended. The first cracks appeared quietly. No stone fell at once. No great voice announced that the old order had weakened. The ceremonies still took place. Fires still burned on the plain. People still approached the monument beneath changing skies. From a distance, the sacred landscape may have looked unchanged, but beneath the visible surface, pressures had begun to move through the world of the builders. Every system carries exhaustion inside it. A monument built through generations demands continued labour from people who did not begin the work themselves. Children inherit obligations they did not choose. Routes must still be travelled. Gatherings must still be supplied. Rituals must still be remembered correctly. Over time, repetition can deepen meaning, but it can also create strain. Perhaps some communities began to ask difficult questions. Why should so much effort continue to flow toward the plain? Why should certain families or ritual leaders control the ceremonies? Why must labour leave the fields during important seasons? What do the ancestors truly require? And who has the authority to answer on their behalf? Such questions rarely emerge in open defiance at first. They appear as hesitation. A smaller group arrives one winter. A promised contribution is delayed. A ceremony feels less certain because an elder who remembered the proper sequence has died. A dispute between families remains unresolved longer than before. The structure of belief does not collapse immediately. It loosens. Social inequality may also have sharpened. In a world where ceremonial centres gather prestige, some people inevitably gain greater influence than others. Those able to host feasts, control access to ritual knowledge, claim important ancestry, or organise labour can become more powerful across generations. What once felt like shared sacred duty may begin to feel unevenly distributed. A young worker standing beneath the stones might admire them and resent them at the same time. He may feel pride in belonging to something enduring, yet bitterness at the demands placed upon his household. A woman preparing food for another large gathering may wonder whether the dead require endless feeding, while the living struggle through difficult seasons. Such feelings do not need to become rebellion in order to weaken unity. Quiet doubt is often enough. The dead themselves may have changed in meaning. Earlier generations had emphasized collective ancestry, shared tombs, and communal memory. But over time, burial customs across Britain began to shift. Individual graves became more common in some places. The focus slowly moved from the collective dead toward more personal displays of status and identity. A society that changes how it buries its people is often changing how it understands belonging. This shift mattered deeply. If identity becomes more individual, then the power of old communal monuments may weaken. A person buried alone beneath a mound with carefully chosen objects carries a different social message from bones gathered into a shared ancestral space. One emphasizes lineage and prestige in a visible personal form. The other emphasizes continuity within the wider community. The landscape itself reflected this tension. Burial mounds rose across the countryside, marking specific individuals or families in ways that drew attention outward from the older sacred centre. The horizon slowly filled with new claims to memory. Stonehenge remained important, but it no longer held symbolic gravity alone. Other places began competing for meaning. Knowledge, too, may have become fragile. Oral traditions depend on uninterrupted transmission. A skilled ritual specialist dies unexpectedly. A generation grows up during hardship and attends fewer ceremonies. A migration disrupts old relationships. Small losses accumulate. The precise understanding of why certain alignments mattered, why specific routes were followed, why certain stones held importance, may begin to blur around the edges. Ritual can survive after explanation fades. People continue the movements because ancestors performed them. Songs are repeated, though some words no longer feel fully understood. Gestures remain while meanings drift. This is not failure. It is one of the oldest transformations in human culture. Sacred systems often outlive the clarity that once animated them. Environmental strain may also have pressed against the old order. Fields can become exhausted. Woodland becomes harder to access after centuries of clearing. Weather shifts bring uncertainty. A few poor harvests can sharpen every social tension already present. In difficult times, communities narrow their focus towards survival. Monumental labour becomes harder to justify when food security weakens. The great gatherings themselves carried hidden risks. Large groups create opportunities for alliance, but also conflict. Old disputes may reopen when rivals stand face to face. Competition over prestige can become sharper. Feasting displays wealth, yet visible wealth invites envy. A sacred centre draws many ambitions into one place, and ambition rarely remains perfectly balanced. Leadership becomes more difficult in such conditions. The older authority of ritual specialists may no longer satisfy everyone. Younger figures may seek influence through different means, perhaps through displays of personal wealth, control of metal objects beginning to appear elsewhere, or local dominance within smaller territories. A centralized ceremonial landscape depends on shared focus. When attention fragments, the center weakens. Even the monument's permanence could become a burden. The stones do not adapt quickly. They stand for continuity, but societies change around them. New customs, new priorities, and new forms of status may not fit comfortably within old sacred frameworks. A younger generation may still respect the monument while feeling less emotionally bound to it than their grandparents once were. And yet no one simply walked away. That is important. The weakening was gradual. The place retained power because memory clung to it. Ancestors still rested nearby. The alignment still worked. The stones still impressed. Travellers still arrived. Ceremonies still occurred. But the certainty beneath those actions had begun to thin. Imagine a winter gathering during this quieter age. The fires burn, but fewer voices fill the dark. Some routes once crowded now carry lighter traffic. Elders notice absences without speaking of them. A ritual proceeds, though one chant falters because the person who knew, the next line is gone. Young people whisper among themselves, distracted by concerns not fully shared by older generations. The monument still stands immense against the sky, but human attention has become less unified. This is the hidden weakness inside every sacred system. Stone can survive storms more easily than communities survive changing meaning. A monument depends on interpretation as much as structure. If enough people cease to feel called by it, the physical form remains while the social force fades. The old world of Stonehenge had been built on gathering labour, gathering memory, gathering the living and the dead beneath one cosmic order. Now subtle forces were pulling outward instead of inward. Families invested more deeply in local identity. Prestige became more personal. Traditions fragmented. The shared horizon narrowed. None of this happened in a single dramatic moment. It happened through choices repeated quietly over lifetimes. A father decides not to travel one season. A son feels less awe than duty while approaching the stones. A local burial mound receives more attention than the distant ceremonial centre. An elder dies, taking irreplaceable memory into silence. These are small events. Together they reshape civilizations. The stones still caught the light at dawn. The plain still carried echoes of footsteps and smoke. But beneath the surface of order, the old confidence had weakened. The monument remained powerful, yet power was no longer unquestioned. The world that created Stonehenge was beginning to drift away from the unity that once made such immense effort feel natural. The cracks were invisible from far away, but they were there. The world beyond the stones was changing faster now, across Britain and beyond. New materials, new customs, and new ambitions moved along old routes of exchange. Metal appeared in human hands, first rare and strange, then increasingly desired. Copper and gold carried a brilliance unlike stone, bone, or polished flint. They reflected firelight with unsettling beauty. A small object of metal could command attention more easily than a great labour of earth. This altered the balance of prestige. For generations, sacred landscapes and communal monuments had gathered authority through shared effort. Now wealth could become portable. Status could hang from the body, rest in a grave, or travel with a person across territories. A polished metal blade or ornament spoke a new language of power, one centered more sharply on the individual. The old ceremonial order felt this pressure. Stonehenge still stood, but the emotional gravity surrounding it had begun to compete with other forms of meaning. Burial customs shifted further. Individual graves beneath round barrows spread across the landscape, often containing carefully placed objects that emphasized personal identity. The dead were no longer always absorbed into collective ancestry. Some were displayed as singular figures. The horizon changed. Mounds rose on ridges where people once looked only toward the great stone circle. Each mound marked a claim. Each burial announced lineage, memory, and status. The landscape that had once drawn attention inward toward communal ceremony now scattered attention across many smaller monuments to particular lives. And with new wealth came new rivalries. Communities that once cooperated around ritual obligations may have become more competitive. Trade routes mattered more. Control over rare materials mattered more. Local leaders sought distinction not only through ceremony, but through ownership, display, and influence. A society organized around communal sacred labor was slowly giving way to a world more fragmented and ambitious. External contacts widened these transformations. Boats crossed waters carrying goods, ideas, techniques, and people. The sea no longer marked only danger or distance. It became a corridor of connection. Along coasts and rivers moved ornaments, weapons, tools, burial customs, and stories from lands beyond the horizon. Britain was not isolated. It was part of a changing network. With contact came uncertainty. Foreign objects could inspire admiration, envy, fear, or imitation. New burial practices challenged older traditions. New technologies altered expectations. A younger generation might look toward novelty while elders defended inherited ways. The tension between old sacred order and emerging social forms deepened with every exchange. Climate may also have sharpened instability. Weather patterns shifted across generations. Wet conditions in some regions altered agriculture and movement. Flooded ground, reduced yields, and environmental pressure could increase local competition. A ceremonial centre depends on surplus. When survival grows harder, people become less willing to invest labour in distant ritual obligations. The sacred landscape around Stonehenge did not disappear overnight. That is important to remember. People continued to move through it. Burials still occurred nearby. The stones still held presence, but the monument no longer stood at the centre of an unquestioned world. It became one sacred place among many, still respected perhaps, still feared perhaps, but no longer able to command the same concentration of belief and labour. Imagine a traveller arriving generations after the monument's greatest age. The stones remain immense. Wind still passes between them. The sun still rises along ancient lines. Yet the gathering feels thinner now. Fewer fires burn. Fewer cattle stand tethered nearby. Some ceremonial paths are overgrown. A young visitor listens to an elder describe the old winter feasts with a kind of distant fascination, as if hearing of another era. Memory itself has become divided. Some people still regard the stones with reverence. Others see them as ancient works whose original meaning has faded into legend. A few may invent new explanations, attaching fresh myths to old forms. This is how sacred places survive transformation. When one worldview weakens, another settles upon it like mist. External threats in the modern military sense are difficult to see clearly in this early age. Yet pressure from outside groups may still have mattered. Movement of people across territories constrain resources and sharpen boundaries. Communities protect pasture, water, and roots. Old alliances fail. New groups arrive with unfamiliar customs. Suspicion grows. Violence need not become large-scale war to alter a society. Repeated local tensions are enough to change behaviour across generations. Weapons became more significant. Axes and blades were no longer only tools. Some carried prestige tied to conflict and authority. A society increasingly focused on individual standing often places greater value on visible symbols of strength. The communal world that raised great stones through shared effort was giving way to a landscape where personal power mattered more openly. The old order struggled to answer these changes. Stonehenge represented continuity, ancestral authority, cosmic alignment, and communal gathering. But new realities demanded flexibility. Trade networks shifted. Leaders competed differently. Burial emphasized the individual. Wealth became mobile. Ritual focus dispersed across many places. The great monument remained fixed while the society around it moved in new directions. This is one of history's deepest patterns. A structure built to stabilize meaning eventually faces a world that no longer organizes meaning in the same way. The stones continue to stand because stone endures. The social system that animated them was less durable. Human priorities had changed, and yet the monument still affected people emotionally. A child seeing the stones at dusk could still feel awe without fully understanding why. Travellers could still pause in silence before them. Elders could still point toward them while speaking of ancestors whose names had become uncertain. Sacred force does not vanish all at once. It lingers in atmosphere, in habit, in fear, in wonder. For some, the old ceremonies may have continued in altered forms. A reduced gathering, a smaller procession, a local rite attached to older alignments. Even as the original structure of belief weakened, fragments survived. Human beings rarely abandon powerful places completely. They reinterpret them, they adapt them. They allow old meanings to fade while keeping the emotional shape. But fragmentation continued. Communities became more locally focused. Prestige became increasingly tied to smaller social units and individual display. The immense cooperative energy that once transported stones across Britain no longer gathered with the same force. The world had become too divided, too transformed, too restless for such unified labour to feel natural again. One by one, the living links weakened, a route forgotten, a chant shortened, a ritual simplified, a story altered, an alliance dissolved. None of these events alone destroyed the sacred landscape. Together they changed the civilization that had sustained it. The stones endured the changes with indifferent patience. Rain darkened them. Frost touched them. Grass moved around their bases. Birds settled briefly on the lintels before lifting again into the wind. Human worlds shifted beneath the sky while the monument watched in silence. The rebellions against the old order were not always fought with weapons. Some were fought through absence, through neglect, through choosing another burial place, another leader, another symbol of identity. The external threats were not only strangers arriving from distant shores, they were new ideas entering the mind, new ambitions entering society, new forms of prestige altering what people valued most deeply. And so the sacred centre slowly lost its hold, not because the stones failed, because the world around them no longer belonged entirely to the people who first believed that such a monument could bind many lives into one enduring pattern beneath the turning heavens. In the end, Stonehenge was not destroyed. It was left behind by the world that created it. That distinction matters. There was no final battle beneath the stones. No invading army shattered the circle in a single furious night. No king stood before the monument and declared the old ways finished forever. The ending was slower, quieter, and in many ways more human than sudden catastrophe. People simply changed. Generations passed beneath the same sky, carrying different fears, different ambitions, different beliefs about death, power, ancestry, and the order of the world. The great gatherings became less central. The old ceremonial pathways faded under grass. Ritual knowledge thinned. Stories shortened. The sacred landscape remained, but its original pulse weakened until memory itself became uncertain. The stones stood through all of it. Winter frost settled on them. Rain darkened their surfaces. Lichens spread slowly across cracks and rough edges. Wind moved through the openings with the same patient sound year after year. Birds nested nearby. Animals grazed around the monument. The plain returned to quieter rhythms while the circle watched in silence. Some stones eventually fell. A lintel shifted. An upright weakened. Soil moved slowly beneath ancient foundations. Gravity continued its endless work. What generations had raised with immense effort could still be altered by time. Yet even broken stones carried weight. A fallen giant remains a giant. The monument did not need perfect completeness to retain its presence. New people approached it with new imaginations. The original builders had vanished into prehistory long before later societies tried to explain the place. For those who came afterward, the monument already belonged to deep time. Ancient Britons, Romans, medieval travellers, and later antiquarians all looked upon the stones through the lens of their own worlds. Mystery became part of the monument itself. When memory fades, imagination enters. Some believed giants must have raised the stones. Others connected the place to legendary figures, magicians, lost peoples, or forgotten religions. The silence of the monument encouraged invention. A place without written explanation invites human storytelling like water invites reflection. Yet beneath the legends, the physical truth endured. Human hands built this place. Human bodies strained against ropes. Human communities organized labor, movement, food, and ceremony across generations. The deeper the mystery felt, the more astonishing that truth became. The monument was not evidence of supernatural builders. It was evidence of how far ordinary human beings can go when belief, cooperation, and vision gather into one purpose. Centuries turned into millennia, empires rose elsewhere and vanished, languages changed, religions spread across continents, wars were fought by men who had never heard the names of the people who cut the first ditch into the chalk. Roads crossed the land, kingdoms formed and broke apart. Still the stones remained on the plain, older than almost everything around them. Time changed the landscape as well. Forests shifted, farming patterns altered. Villages appeared and disappeared. The open chalkland retained its broad horizons, but the human world around it became layered with newer histories. Yet Stonehenge resisted absorption into ordinary life. It remained set apart, even when its purpose could no longer be fully explained. That separation gave it power. People continued to feel something near the stones, though they described it differently in each age. Awe, fear, curiosity, reverence, melancholy. The monument carried emotional weight beyond precise understanding. It reminded later societies that human beings had once organized themselves around meanings now difficult to recover. Archaeology entered the story much later. Careful hands began opening the earth again, though for different reasons than the original builders. Trenches exposed ancient chalk cuts. Cremated bones emerged from soil. Fragments of antler picks, pottery, tools, and human remains appeared under patient examination. Slowly, piece by piece, scholars reconstructed glimpses of the vanished world. But archaeology revealed limits as well as answers. A ditch can be measured, but belief cannot. A stone source can be identified, but the exact emotion of the journey cannot. Bones can be dated, but the voice speaking during a funeral fire is lost forever. The closer researchers came to the monument, the more they understood how much had disappeared into silence. And yet silence has its own kind of truth. The builders did not leave instructions because perhaps they never imagined a future separated so completely from their own world. Their meanings lived in ceremony, repetition, movement, and a memory shared face to face. Once those living chains broke, only fragments remained. The stone survived because stone survives better than human intention. Still, enough endured to change how we see the ancient past. Stonehenge shattered the old assumption that prehistoric people lived only in small, isolated simplicity. The monument proved large-scale planning, engineering skill, social organization, long-distance movement, and complex ceremonial life existed thousands of years before written history reached Britain. It forced the modern world to reconsider what ancient societies were capable of imagining and achieving. Its legacy spread far beyond archaeology. Artists painted it beneath storm clouds and moonlight. Writers filled it with longing and mystery. Travellers crossed great distances to stand near it. Spiritual seekers returned to the solstices. Historians debated its meanings. Scientists studied its alignments and geology. The monument became a mirror into which every age projected its own questions about origin, death, time, and belonging. Perhaps that is why it still feels alive. Not because the original ceremonies continue unchanged. They do not. Not because we fully understand the builders. We do not. The monument lives because it continues to create emotional movement in the human mind. It still asks the same ancient questions. What makes people gather? What deserves enormous effort? How should the living remember the dead? Can human beings create something that outlasts their own world? On quiet mornings, mist still drifts across Salisbury Plain. The stones emerge slowly from whiteness, dark and motionless. Birds cross the open sky. Grass bends beneath the wind exactly as it did thousands of years ago. Visitors arrive speaking languages the builders could never have imagined. Cameras replace oral memory. Roads carry people where ancient tracks once wound across the land. Yet the atmosphere remains strangely resistant to modern speed. People lower their voices there. They walk carefully. They look upward. Time feels layered near the stones. The present becomes thin enough for older worlds to seem close beneath the surface. One can almost imagine the antler picks striking chalk, the ropes tightening around stone, the winter fires burning while faces glow red in the dark. The builders themselves are gone. Their names vanished. Their houses collapsed. Their descendants changed beyond recognition. But the mark they placed upon the land endured long enough to outlive memory itself. That may be the final lesson of Stonehenge. Human beings are temporary, yet they ache for permanence. They know their bodies will fail, their voices fade, their children forget, their societies change, and still they build. They raise stone against the sky. They align earth with the movement of the heavens. They gather together and insist, for a moment, that meaning can be made visible. On the plain, evening slowly arrives. Light withdraws from the grass. The stones darken one by one. Wind moves through the ancient openings with a sound too soft to hold. Far above, the first stars appear over the same horizon the builders once watched so carefully. For a while, the world seems still again, and in that stillness, Stonehenge remains what it has always been, a question standing in stone,